going to do much in terms of Russia and Ukraine and stuff. There's been some YouTube videos from armchair generals that I've seen in the last couple of days, and I had a quick look through their history. That every time Zelensky sneezes, it's Ukraine's going to win the day, and it's all great for the last 4 years plus. And every time Putin sniffs, he's got pneumonia, he's going to die, and Russia's going to collapse. They're almost universally one-sided and heavily slanted, and it's like if a Russian trips over on the front lines, it's a sign that Russia is going to be driven back to the Kamchat, driven back to the Bering Sea and into the Bering Sea, and there's nothing the Ukrainians do that is wrong. And sadly, they get millions and millions of views, and you read through the commenters, it's like, no, not even a dissenting opinion, there's no alternative opinion being put forward anywhere. And so when you get the mainstream media even picking up and saying, oh, Ukraine's doing this wonderful stuff, well, vile Russian strikes lasting 12 hours. Before we go into it, yeah, okay, the Russians are doing drone and missile strikes, saves on people, I guess. They've carried it on. And when I see these other commentators going about how wonderful the air defense system in Ukraine is going to be and everything else, it's like, well, if it's so wonderful, how come Russia can launch and sustain such prolonged attacks against Ukrainian territory, all over Ukrainian territory, if these Wunderwaffe systems are in place and working? Maybe things are more nuanced than the garden path they're trying to send us down. The incursions into Poland and Romania should also not be happening if their air defense system is as wonderful as it is, or the incursions have been launched by another actor, and not Russia. We'll see. I think a lot of those commentators, especially when you look at their videos and the number of years and what they keep saying and saying and saying, it's like at some point you either commit to a lie and keep selling it, or you're going to have to stop and wind back some of what you've said in order to better reflect the reality on the ground. And so that, I don't know, it's a bit hard when you don't get to see the Russian side of things. I'm sure there's Telegram and other content out there, but it tends to be tucked away or not really covered. Yeah, even if it's blatantly propaganda, it's still important to see and hear a viewpoint from the other side, so that at least you get the basis, the beginnings of a balanced understanding of what's going on. So to have these articles come out screaming and crying about a 12-hour attack against Ukrainian targets, particularly now that they're reaching into Kiev constantly, it's well, the question I have from all of that is, if all these other articles I'm being told are accurate, how is this happening? How is this able to keep happening repeatedly and seemingly at will? It looks like, from how the articles are presenting the actual attacks going on, I would say that it looks like the Russians have the ability to attack at will with unmanned vehicles and missiles anywhere within Ukraine. And they haven't even started in on their longer range, larger systems, IRBMs and such as were used by Iran and the Houthis against Israel. Yep, they haven't really made an appearance yet. When they do, well, I guess that's an escalation, because a lot of them can be nuclear tipped. Going back the other direction, well, similar sort of things. So you go, well, is it just a unilateral action? Is it just Russia smacking Ukraine because they can with massive missile strikes? Well, there's been missiles flying in the other direction as well that have penetrated whatever air defense systems Russia's got, have entered Russian territory, and have been hitting a lot of refineries. There was stuff I saw yesterday about a electronics plant that was known to produce wiring harnesses and circuitry for guided weapons and military platforms. That was hit pretty badly, and there's a lot of celebration going on in those YouTubers, stuff like that, with the emergence of the Flamingo ground launch cruise missile, which, for all measures, looks like an upgraded V1, or a combination between that and a Jindavik drone from the 1970s, 1980s, which was a unmanned drone, targeting drone developed by Australia. I don't think it ever could have carried weaponry. It was designed as a targeting drone for air gunnery and missiles and things like that. I mean, this Flamingo design looks like something from the 40s to the 70s. But look, it's apparently being effective. And you've got, again, you had article after article after article saying the Russians could no longer produce drones, they've run out of missiles, run out of everything else. Yet they're continuing to launch hours and hours and hours long attacks against Ukrainian targets without seemingly being bothered by Ukrainian air defense systems. I think we're being sold a lie to an extent. That the reality is maybe not as bleak as Russian sources might claim, but it's not as sunshine and rainbows or as Wonder Waffle as a lot of even I saw on Twitter and X this morning, people were celebrating these ideas used for cutting fibre optic cables of fibre optic controlled drones on the battlefield. And they were a technological failure. Not the drones, but these methods for countering them. Because it failed to take into, well, it might have worked on the ground or on the bench, but the amount of, like, there are actual physical reasons why it could not work. And it posed more of a threat to the operator than it did to any opponent you were trying to take on, which is not the sort of weapon system you want to have, or even counter system you want to have. There was also an article saying there was an Australian-developed laser defense system coming through that apparently will be heading to Ukraine to help counter Russian drones. But at the same time, there was another article starting to consider the risk of, well, they call it sabotage by Russia or Russian-aligned interests for having been so actively engaged in being actively involved in in the Ukrainian conflict. And so it well, also makes sense that those sort of things are to be expected. I talked about it a while back about, well, if you're going to contribute militarily, like bombs and bullets to one side over another, you can't pretend that you're neutral. And so when the other side decides to come looking, you can't claim that your hands are clean. So, yep, they massive attacks, plenty of regions, etc. Russia would not stop its aggression with Ukraine, according to Zelensky. Of course, he's gonna talk his legs off no matter what, and um, they're conflating the Danish event, which the Danes still haven't come out and said where they've come from. Now, I think, based on what I've been reading, it's going to turn out to be either civil in origin or not Russian. But again, interesting to see what will happen. Enhanced surveillance and an air defence frigate. Well, it's interesting. So Denmark said there's no evidence to suggest Russian involvement in, and Russia said wasn't us. So it'll be interesting. The reason I sort of brought up the Russian thing, the Ukrainian thing, was more because I'm a firm believer in the idea. Okay, that's a video. A firm believer in the idea that if you are trying to work out why something's being done or what's going to be done, that if someone comes along and says, I'm going to do this, it makes sense to listen to them because they're telling you why they're doing what they're doing. It's the reason why I advocate reading the books of political leaders from before they took power, because it explains their rationale for doing what they're going to do. And I've talked about that previously, including despots and authoritarians and people who've been horrible stains on history because they explain their reasoning. And corrupted as it may be, you can understand then, you can better understand why they did what they did because they've used their own words to tell you. The UN General Assembly has had some interesting speakers and events over the last week. The Russians were one of the last groups to get up and speak, and the Russian foreign minister. Now, this guy's kind of interesting. People are sort of whispering that he may be, if he was 10 years younger in particular, but that he may be one of the next, g'day Ash, saying that the Russian foreign minister might be the next candidate off the ranks to replace Putin whenever Putin retires or dies in office or whatever Putin's plan is for leaving power is. They don't see Medvedev as being the next big candidate. It's this guy. And so when this guy gets up and talks about things, it's probably worth having a good listen to, because not only is it explaining what Russia's doing and wanting to do now, but it's probably going to leave echoes. If he ends up taking power, you're going to see echoes coming forward in what he's trying to say and do. So Sergei Lavrov. So keep that name in your minds, because we may see him being the next Russian leader after Putin and Medvedev leave power by whatever means. So Lavrov, lots of other countries sent their leaders. They sent the foreign minister, which is also a sign. So if a lot of other countries, say US, Australia, Israel, their leaders all got up to speak. Okay, so that sets a certain tone. That sets a certain level of what you expect other nations to do as well. So who gets up to speak for the Russians? The foreign minister. Now, is that because they're positioning him to be the next leader, or what? And so that's another reason why I think Lavrov's being not necessarily groomed, but certainly on his way for it. Certainly a person to keep tabs on going forward. That doesn't mean anything, Ash. That doesn't mean anything. You can, if you're not party to the ICC, just like Israel's not and America's not, there's plenty of countries that have people have attempted ICC warrants against Netanyahu for what's gone on in Gaza and things like this. The Americans basically said that if any American ever gets arrested by the ICC and taken to trial in The Hague, basically The Hague will cease to exist because they will go in and get their people back. So the ICC is quite sadly a bit of a sham because it requires everybody to buy into it. And if big powers don't buy into it, then its effectiveness is limited. So Roger Duterte, and I did have this article previous week, Roger Duterte did, one of the previous Philippine leaders, he's under trial now in the ICC for his anti-drug policies, the ones that basically gave free rein to shoot drug dealers. And whilst people were unhappy with what he'd done, the whole reason he's sitting in the ICC is because there's a Marcos back in power in the Philippines, and it's bad blood between them. And so it's seen as a political arrest more than anything else. And so when only people that the West don't like end up in the ICC, it feeds into criticisms that the ICC is not a universal system. It's a very selective political process. So the whole idea of the General Assembly is that irrespective of your arrest warrants for the ICC, they've had genocidal maniacs speak at the General Assembly. It's part of the UN Charter and mandate and everything else like that, and it's guaranteed safe passage during that period. I mean, Sarkozy just got arrested for things, and he's facing a 5-year prison sentence. If Sarkozy had spoken at the General Assembly when he was the president of France, does that mean he probably should have been arrested because he was doing the naughty things at the time? Yeah, the whole concept of, I mean, and that's one reason they put the General Assembly, the UN in the US, was that, and how it was set up was to allow safe passage and basically sort of guaranteed safety of you come in, talk, go back, then all bets are off again. It's not a unique concept globally. In Afghanistan, I can't remember the name of what it was, but basically, if the tribal leaders invited you to tea, you'd go. And so you'd have at these little, not tribal councils, but these little churras? No, that's not the name of them. But basically, you'd have American or NATO military people sitting down with tribal leaders and the Taliban having tea, because that's the way it's done. Now, the fact that after everyone leaves and go back to their respective bases, they go back to killing each other, by and by. But for the period of of being called a council, effectively, you went and behaved yourself. So it's not, like I said, it's not unique globally. But anyway, so Lavrov, and I'm sure people have blamed him for plenty of things too. So Sergei Lavrov has basically said Russia is being concerned about threats being levied by Western countries. If you've been watching the news, you could certainly see how they perceive that, like NATO's response to Russian flights down the middle of the Baltics, incidental penetration of Estonian airspace, the saber rattling that's going on. You can understand how the Russians are like, we start to see this as a bit of a threat. Russia and Israel is an interesting one. They've certainly, because Russia's, I guess, supported Iran or been friendly with Iran and Syria, that they probably have not a lot of love lost for the Israelis. But at the same time, I think they're fairly neutral towards them. they're not massively in favour of them. They're not massively out against them. But for Lavrov to come out and say, look, yep, they didn't like what Hamas did. They think that Israel were heavy-handed in their response. Okay, that's kind of interesting statement on that. So we skip past that. Sanctions, yep. Okay, well, obviously, if you're the ones on the receiving end, you think they're going to be illegal, etc. I wasn't aware that Russia and China had attempted to delay the sanctions being reimposed for a particular reason. I didn't see that article, so I don't know what they did to try and delay it. But obviously, Russia and China are like, And that's the thing. When you're sanctioning such a large portion of the world's population, again, I've talked about this before, you've got to ask yourself, why? What is it going to affect? Eventually, who's going to suffer the most out of it? If over half the world's population is being sanctioned by, we talk about democratic processes. If more than 50% of the world's population you've deemed to be evil, well, maybe it's your position that needs to be reevaluated. So, the big statements, though, were to do with what's happening in Europe and Ukraine. This is, I think, the key part to take away from the message is that, yes, they're seeing what NATO's doing in the articles in the Western media. What that's doing is increasing threats of force against Russia and accusing Russia of basically preparing to attack NATO and EU and everything else. And he said, well, Putin's said no. This is a very, very clear statement that follows that Russia has never had and does not have such intentions, but any aggression against my country will be met with a decisive response. All right, so that first half of the statement is telling everyone they're dreaming. The second half is, you touch us, we're going to touch you back. That, whatever else you think about what's gone on in the world in the last 10 or 15 years, is a pretty reasonable statement. It's a pretty fair statement. The same thing goes for people who say, well, Russia's being held behind the lines in Ukraine and we're winning and everything else like that. When you've got to go back to the statements made 2021 and earlier by Putin about if he was going to go into Ukraine, here are the limits on what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. And if you look critically at the situation, ignore all the reporting, just look at where the front lines are and have been. That seems largely, not completely, but largely to be the case. And people say, well, oh no, Kiev's at risk and all the other stuff's at risk. Again, we talked before about the different missiles and stuff in use. There is a lot of stuff, even in the intermediate range class of weapons, that Russia is sitting on and has shown no interest in using. They've certainly not been using their backfires or bears massively. I mean, they've used them to launch weapons from inside Russian territory, but they've not taken the Cold Warfare approach to steamroll west until they hit the English Channel. No, they've. I don't think there's anyone who's going to deny that they've dug in depth. They've taken what amounts to a defensive position now, and people say, "Well, that's because they've run out of people." Well, you could argue that, but I'd also argue that they've got the territory they intend to hold, and they're stopping. Well, they're not making moves to push further west. They've dug in depth. They've got their multi-layered defences well established. It's a defensive line now, and yeah, they've kettled Ukrainians from time to time. They've shown no desire to push further. Well, no practical intent to push further. People say, oh, they don't have the equipment to do so. Well, yeah, they do. They're just not using it and haven't shown a desire to use it. And even if Ukraine, with their recent Flamingo attacks, manages to take out refineries in the West and factories in the West, you're going to run into the same problem that Germany did in World War II, in that Russia is a monster of a country that extends so far to the east. All they have to do is move their production facilities east of the Urals and carry on. It's exactly how they produced enough T-34s to roll over Poland and Germany in the 1940s. And if people think Russia hasn't remembered that lesson, well, you're going to find out in the next couple of years. So we'll see on that regard. But that was a little bit of a sidetrack there. So, yeah, I think this is one of the clearest statements about Russia's position on what's been going on of late. And is it something that, ignoring what happens in the media and isolated incidents, is this something we're going to see people see them stick to? Personally, I think we will. I wish I had access to Russian media that was on the same level as Western media to get a bit of a look on this, but yeah, not really. It's not. Can't find it. Can't find it in English. So I'm sure it's out there. But yeah, it's hard trying to interpret what another side's doing if you can't read what they're telling you you're doing. So yeah, the fact that NATO stepped up their stuff, Russia's basically saying, look, we don't like it. Fair enough. Yeah, okay, it's a repeat of stuff. The important part of this article is what Lavrov had to say. I don't know where Trump came from with this. Clearly someone got into his ear and told him something, or he believed something, because it's almost a reversal of his prior position that he thinks that Kiev could win back all of Ukraine. I don't know how. I don't know what with. Because they've already deployed Abrams and Leopards and Patriot batteries and F-16s and M155s and Jeopards? No. There's basically javelins and all sorts of stuff. And I don't think there's been a fundamentally substantive gaining of territory or regaining of territory that Ukraine has achieved, even with all that hardware and the fact it's drained Western military resources. It doesn't make sense. I don't know where he's coming from. I mean, the fact the Flamingo has appeared, but it's ground launched cruise missile. Eventually, the Russians are going to target those production facilities and those storage facilities. It's not going to be the game changer, I think, that a lot of people are claiming. The sustained Russian drone attacks indicates that the air defense systems are not a bother for the Russians. So if Ukraine is going to regain territory that is held by a massively dug in... Now, we're going to just toss away who's fighting who here. Just straight military tactics and logistics. Again, attacking a dug-in defensive force, you're going to need at least 6 to 1 attacking ratio. You're going to need integrated fires, so you're going to need control of the air, which, well, neither side truly has. And you're going to attack against a system that has effective counter artillery already set up and sighted, and heavy artillery already sighted on likely attacking lines. It's going to make the Somme, it's going to make the Western Front in World War One look like a picnic. There's even with a wonder weapon. Now, if you went and used a tactical nuke or something like that, well, that's just going to invite being steamrolled next time something happens. But it just doesn't make sense, especially moving into the northern winter. So the fighting season effectively on the plains there is gone. Russia missed any chance to push to the Dnieper, and Ukraine missed any chance to push back. I mean, waterways form much of the boundary of fighting as it is at the moment. So, from a pure military, strategic, and tactical point of view, I don't know where Trump thinks he's getting this from. Short of boots on ground by Western militaries, and that'll be a very, very bad thing. Yeah, the one chance of a breakout, I think the Russians hold that card, but they've dug in. They're not showing expeditionary markers. They're not showing a desire to push forward. Now, they probably could. They could probably push the front lines for another 50 or 60 Ks at significant cost. Far easier than Ukraine could push them back 50 or 60 Ks. Unless it comes to a peace treaty and Putin willingly gives up that territory, I don't see Ukraine ever getting it back. Sorry. That's just a reality of dug in things. And the fact that the last couple of asymmetric warfare engagements, i.e. Iraq, Afghanistan, were effectively lost, drawn out combat. Libya, you might say, well, that was a win, but there were plenty of things about it that weren't a win. None of them were against an equivalent system. Now, the last time you had an asymmetric win like this was probably Israel taking the Golan Heights. They defeated a much stronger Syrian tank force, at least numerically, or even defeating Egypt in the Sinai. Probably the last big examples where a numerically inferior force, maybe roughly equivalently equipped or maybe even better equipped, took on a much larger defending or attacking system and won. I can't see a repeat of that, not with the level of training and capability on each side. So I don't know where Trump's getting this from or who told him sweet nothings. But anyway, it is still promising, though, to see what Lavrov had to say here at the end, that in the approaches to the current administration, we see a desire not only to contribute to ways to realistically resolve the crisis, but also a desire to develop pragmatic cooperation without adopting an ideological stance. Again, that's a really good statement and a really positive statement to hear. You didn't hear Lavrov beating the drums of war, of threatening to roll over Europe or stomp all everything. And an example I saw come up in discussion, was it today? It might have been last night, was about Georgia. Obviously, Russia and Georgia had a bit of a fisticuffs a few years back. Georgia was heading EU bound, or at least trying to align themselves with the EU. They're too far east to be part of the EU. You also then had Russia sort of stepping in and say, look, South Ossetia has asked us for help. We're going to go and help them. And it was also the first time I had seen footage of drones being shot down. There were engagements where Russian fighters shot down drones being used by the Georgians or other people helping them out. But it ended, the conflict ended. Georgia still exists as a country. It's still, well, as far as I'm aware, independent from Russia. And it's like, well, the whole argument of, oh, Russia's just going to steamroll them, get rid of them, or reabsorb them. Well, I mean, Russia fought two very bloody wars in Chechnya. And Chechnya, while it's, I guess, in the orbit of Russia, still exists. Georgia still has pretty much its full independence. So I don't see where the argument here in Ukraine and the rest of Europe goes. I'd be willing. It may be a stupid thing, but I'd be willing to take Russia at face value for what they're saying here. So it'd be interesting. And this throwaway line at the end here is about, well, why did you wait so long to recognise Palestine? Is it because you hoped there would be no one and nothing left to recognise? Stab. Stab, 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 stab. Yeah.